Buongiorno, this is Chef Deborah from Rocca's Bakery, welcoming you back to episode 2 of our spring series. We're going to be doing cream horns and Sicilian cannolis today. So we're going to start with the cream horn shells, and while they're baking, we're going to work on the cannolis. So what I have here is a store-bought Pepperidge Farm Puff Pastry sheet, and it's really great for the home baker who doesn't know how to make puff pastry from scratch but want to make cream horns for the family and friends. So we want to thaw this in the refrigerator for several hours, or preferably overnight, and then in the next day it'll be ready to roll. And so you just pull it out of the refrigerator and let it come to room temperature so that it's real pliable like this, because we're going to roll it out a little bit. So we're going to start first by getting our cream horn forms ready to go. So this is a cream horn form, and you can get these on Amazon, and they come in different sizes. They come smaller than this, and I think this is the biggest one that they make, that I've been able to find anyway, and it makes a very large cream horn. But I found, for me, the best thing to use to keep the puff pastry from sticking to the form is to spray it with Baker's Joy. Now, Baker's Joy is different than Pam. Pam is great for spraying your skillet or something you're going to put your eggs in or something like that. But when you're baking, Baker's Joy has flour in it along with the oil. And so it really does help the baked goods to stop sticking to the pan or to a form like you're doing here. So what I normally do is in the bakery, I just take it over the garbage can and spray it, because the spray will get everywhere. So I've already sprayed all of these forms so that they're not going to stick. And so we're going to start rolling out now. This is about maybe 1/4 inch thick. So we're just going to take and put a little bit of flour down on your counter or your board, whatever you're rolling on. And we just want to make it a little bit larger. We're not going to make it super thin, but thin enough, because we're going to be layering this over the cream horn form. So we want to make sure that it's even. So you don't have to press too hard, actually hardly at all, because this dough is very, very soft. So we're just going to even it out just a little bit. And I'm going to grab my favorite tool. I think I've said in one of my other episodes, my accordion cutter is my favorite tool, and this is one of the things that I use it for, is to cut cream horn shells. Like that. And then what I normally do is take this last strip and then run it against the side of the one that's already been cut, so you get the same size cut. And we will have some leftovers here for the puff pastry, and that's perfectly fine. But what we also want to do is cut the sides of these, trim them, because we've rolled them and it's actually crushed the lamination or the layers of butter and dough together so that it doesn't puff as well. So we want to trim those sides a little bit too. And we're going to go ahead and start forming the dough over the shells. And these shells, or these forms rather, are kind of persnickety. And I know my husband and my dishwasher, they don't like it when I'm using these forms, because they're hard to wash. So what I have is egg wash, which is 1 beaten egg and a tablespoon of water. And if you don't want to use eggs, you can use milk or cream. Lightly brush each strip. And this is so that when we place it around the form, it's going to stick. Otherwise, it will just kind of fall off of itself. So we really want them to stick to each other so they make a nice cohesive shell when we get them out of the oven. So what we're going to do is preheat our oven while we're doing this to 400 degrees. And as you can see in front of me, I've got 2 cookie sheets or baking pans lined with parchment paper. So we're going to go ahead and take one of our forms, and we're going to lay it diagonally across the tip. And we're going to put the tip up over and tuck it underneath so that it's touching the egg wash, so that way you know it's going to stick. And we do a tight roll. We're not going to pull the dough, but we're doing a tight roll like this. We want to have it so that it comes down to the bottom. So you can kind of twist it, because it's nice and it's greased on the form, so you can twist it. And you want to see the tip of the form come out of the top right here. We don't want it to touch the edge there, but that's one. So this is, we're going to do all of this, and then we're going to egg wash them again, and we're going to sprinkle them with our beautiful sanding sugar. that I love so much that makes everything sparkle like stars. And it actually, once you get everything assembled and you get all the forms sprayed and do all of that, it actually goes very quickly. Again, this is not a hard thing to do. And this is another project that you can do with your kids, your grandkids. They're not too fond of whipped cream for some reason, but it sure is good. Now you can fill the cream horns with like a cannoli filling if you want, but typically these are filled with a whipped cream, and that's what we're going to do today. So as you can see, one sheet of puff pastry makes 6 shells. So typically in those Pepperidge Farm boxes, you'll get 2 sheets. So you'll be able to make a dozen cream horn shells of this size, of the large size, out of 1 box of puff pastry. So I've rolled out our second sheet of puff pastry, the same as I did the first, and we're going to go ahead and cut them. I'm going to cheat a little here and just kind of see if I can eyeball it. Remember, we're going to trim the edges because now that we've rolled it, the puff pastry's been kind of smashed, so it won't get a good puff on it and raise really nice. So none of these scraps we're going to keep. And that might be a little bit of a thinner one, but that's okay. When we get it full of cream and stuff, nobody will ever know. So sometimes if you're using the accordion cutter, it doesn't cut all the way through. So that's why it's great to have a pizza wheel on hand. And again, if you don't want to buy an accordion cutter, because they're about $35 to $45 depending on how many wheels you purchase. The cutters come with 4, 5, and 6 wheels. And of course the price is according to how many wheels you have. You can do this with a pizza cutter and you can eyeball it. It's not a problem to do that at all. You don't need any special equipment because, you know, our grandmothers didn't have any special equipment. They used a knife. I still have my grandmother's pastry cutter. Of course I don't use it now. I use my KitchenAid attachment to roll out my pasta, but I still do cut my pasta by hand. So we're going to continue to roll these on our form. Again, at an angle and tucking that first little piece underneath so it sticks. And I've made thousands and thousands of these over the years. I could probably do this blindfolded. This is actually one of our customers' favorites. People will come in and buy dozens of these at a time. So we always have to make sure we have some in the bakery for sure. Now, if you are on our website at roccasbakery.com, you will not see these available for shipping only because they are filled with cream. We can't ship anything that is temperature sensitive because it is a milk product. It can spoil and you can get sick. Even if it's on ice or in dry ice, we don't want to take a chance that it would spoil. So we don't offer these for shipping, but a lot of our other Italian cookies we do. So if you haven't ever visited our website before and looked at our online store, do that. There's a lot of really cool things on there for you to enjoy. So we're going to egg wash these again, or again, if you're not using egg, you're using milk, so that we're going to sprinkle with our sanding sugar, our sparkling sugar. And again, you can, if you've listened to my other episodes, you can purchase the sanding sugar at Amazon, Bob's Red Mill, or King Arthur flour is my favorite. And normally I have a plate underneath me because it really makes a mess when you're doing this, but there's no other way to do this and get it on the shells. So we just make a mess and get our bench scraper and clean it up. So we're going to do this to all of our shells, and then we're going to put them in the oven for about 15 minutes or so until they're really nice and golden. We don't want them burned. We don't want them a dark golden color. We want them, medium golden. And we're going to alternate them tip to end so that we can get as many as we can and allow about 2 inches in between, because these will puff up pretty large on your tray. So the puff pastry, the reason they call it puff pastry is because, and seam side down, because it'll expand about 1.5 inches or 2 inches from the size it is now. So they do puff pretty good. And the reason I like the King Arthur flour the best is because it it gives off a nice sparkle even after it's baked. And Bob's Red Mill does too, although during the COVID pandemic, when a lot of products weren't available even online, that product was not available, and I have not seen it back yet on Bob's Red Mill, so you have to be careful. Now, if you don't want to buy sanding sugar, you can use regular granulated sugar. Just don't expect it to have the same look that you see here today. It will be a little bit different. If you don't want any sugar on the outside, if you have a diet restriction that doesn't allow you to eat a lot of sugar, certainly you can just leave it plain, but do make sure that you do egg wash so that it has a nice golden brown color. This is a little time consuming for such a little pastry, but it's really worth it. Now, when they come out of the oven, we want to be sure that we let them cool for about 4 minutes, and then we want to take them out of the shell, because if we let them cool completely in the shell, they have a tendency to stick, even though the shell's been adequately, sprayed with Baker's Joy. So we want to get them when they're warm so that we can just gently pull them off, because once they're baked, the shells are pretty fragile. So you don't want to have to do too much to them. So anyway, we're going to put these cream horn forms into the oven, 400 degrees for about 15 to 20 minutes. Let them cool for about 4 and take them off the form, and then we're going to fill them. So we'll be back in just a few minutes. So we're going to work on our cannoli filling right now. So we've got 8 ounces of mascarpone cheese. We've got about 1.5 cups of whole milk ricotta cheese. And again, we want to use quality cheeses in this, because it's all about the cannoli filling, not necessarily the shells. And I've got about 1/2 cup of powdered sugar with a packet of Whip It to stabilize the sugar mixed together before we add it to the cream cheese. If you don't like your cannoli filling as sweet, you can of course put less. You can go with 1/4 cup or even a third of a cup of powdered sugar. So we're going to go ahead and mix that together. Doesn't take long, and we do want these cheeses to be at room temperature. So if you take them out a couple of hours before you start wanting to make the cannoli filling, otherwise it won't emulsify. Especially the mascarpone cheese, it will tend to clump, and kind of like cream cheese, because it's an Italian version of cream cheese. So you want it to be a nice smooth filling. So we're going to add about 1 teaspoon of vanilla, 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. Now, if you don't like cinnamon in your cannoli filling, you don't have to put it in, but it's really great. It has a nice warm flavor. And I do have the zest of 1 orange, because we're doing Sicilian cannolis, so we like to put a little bit of orange in ours. We're going to go ahead and whip that again. That should be good. And then I saved, when we whipped the cream for the cream horn fillings, I did save some whipped cream to go into this cannoli filling, so that we can use that. So we're going to go ahead and fold. I'm going to put this in a smaller bowl, or a deep, shallow bowl, so that you can see what I'm doing. Because I don't think I've talked about folding techniques, and although it's not as important with the cannoli filling as it would be like with a cake when you're looking at egg whites, but there is a technique to folding in the baking world that we do need to learn. And folding is basically just mixing the ingredients together without deflating the whipping cream or the egg whites, whatever it is that you've whipped air into. So we're going to take, this is probably 3/4 cup of mini chocolate chips. Now you want mini chocolate chips. So we're going to fold those in at last, but I always have them sitting aside. So we have about 2.5 cups of fresh whipped cream, and we're just going to fold. So we want to take it and turn it upside down, go down the center, come down again, and I take my spatula and roll around, and we're going to fold towards the center, and again fold towards the center, and lift up over, fold towards the center. So we're going to do that in increments with our whipped cream that's left over, so that we don't deflate the whipped cream. That's the nice thing about the stabilizer whippet that I use in the bakery, is that we don't have to be as concerned that we'll lose that consistency with the whipped cream. So you can see now it was a little grainy before because it's ricotta cheese and mascarpone cheese, but now as we're adding the fresh whipped cream, it's becoming a lot creamier. Now some people don't like whipped cream in their cannoli filling, but I think it adds a richness and just a really, really nice texture and a mouthfeel, because that's all about baking too, is how does it feel on your tongue and the flavors and the sensations that you have when you're biting into something that tastes really good. You can see the consistency now is really beautiful. And so we're going to take and we're going to put in our mini chocolate chips, and we're going to fold those in as well. And I've had customers ask me to make them cannoli with no chocolate chips in it. They didn't want it, they just wanted the cream. And that's perfectly fine. We got a little left in there. But I think it adds a lot with the orange and the chocolate. It's a wonderful pairing of flavors. And we're going to be doing, in one of our later episodes, we're going to be doing a Madeleine cookie, which is a little French cookie that's shaped like a shell. I think you can see some of the coffee shops sell them pre-packaged that have been in the package for God only knows how long, but we're going to be doing a chocolate orange Madeleine cookie, and it's a delicious butter cookie. So you don't want to miss that episode. So we're going to taste this to make sure that there's enough orange in it. We want just a hint of orange, not too much. It's perfect. So that's our cannoli filling. So we're going to go ahead and put that in our pastry bag fitted with the same kind of tip that we used on the cream horns. And then we're going to go start frying our shells, and then when they cool, we'll fill them. So we'll be back here in a flash. Okay, so we're back with our cooled cream horn shells. So as you can see, I took them off the forms, and they're baked really nice and golden brown. A couple of them baked a little bit further apart, and that's okay. The cream might come out a little bit, but it's still going to be fine. So with puff pastry, it is kind of its own creation in the oven. So sometimes it does that even though they're tightly wound, but that's why we use the egg wash or the milk to make sure that it sticks and we're overlapping the strips of dough on each. So we've got about 2 cups of whipping cream, 2.5 cups of heavy whipping cream here in the bowl with our beater attachment. And here we've got about 1 cup of powdered sugar with a packet of our whippet to stabilize the whipped cream. So we're just going to go ahead and add that to the whipped cream with about a tablespoon, because we have a good bit of whipping cream in here, about a tablespoon of vanilla. That will flavor it really nice. So what I'd like to do before I start whipping really high, because we have to whip our cream on high, is to cover the bowl with a towel. Then we can turn it on high and it won't splatter everywhere in the kitchen. It'll just get on the towel, and it saves our clothes and a mess everywhere, because I've had whipping cream all over me and my hair, and I have my employees come up to me and say, "You've got all this white stuff all over your hair." And I say, "Oh, that's whipping cream." So once it starts to thicken, you can take the towel off, but this saves a whole lot of time in picking little pieces of whipping cream out of off your face and your clothes and the counter. And it's not quite there because we have quite a bit of whipping cream in here. So we're just going to keep this covered and let it go at higher speed now. And after we get through filling our cream horn shells, we're going to make our cannoli filling. And it's a Sicilian filling, so I use a little bit of orange, and I put the mini chocolate chips in our filling. We're going to go ahead and let that go for a minute. I'm going to check the oil real quick, the oil temperature on the cannoli oil for frying. So we're going to wait till it gets to the right temperature, and it's still splattering a little bit. Okay, see, our whipped cream has now come to a stiff peak, or a stiff consistency. And I'll show you again what we're looking for. So it should hold its shape and be real thick. That's what we want it to look like, because we definitely do not want it to be running out of our cream horn shells. Put that in the sink. So what I have here is a piping bag, and this is a disposable bag. You can buy them at Walmart in their baking center. I don't think the grocery stores sell these, but Michael's or Hobby Lobby, if you have those stores up here, craft store, they sell them as well. And I do have a star tip on the end of it. You can, if you don't want to buy a tip, do a Ziploc bag and cut the one end of it off, and you can still pipe it in. It just won't have a nice swirl design on the end of it like if you had a tip, but it certainly is usable just like that. But we, you know, for the bakery, we like to finish things off a little bit differently than maybe what we might want to do at home. But you can get those tips, like I said, and they're cheap. You know, you can buy the Ateco brand, which is a really good stainless steel tip that doesn't rust. They're less than $1, depending on the size that you get. So we're going to fill this bag. I have to fill it a couple of times to do these. Then I like to squeeze a little bit out, make sure everything's coming out the way it should. And then you just grab the shell and then you fill it up. And again, this is one of those other things that goes really fast, but I've made thousands of these in my lifetime, so I could do this in my sleep. And this one has a little bit of a separation. As you can see, you can still fill, but not be quite as aggressive when you're piping in it, because you don't want it to squeeze out of the separation there, but they're still very, very usable, and they're still very beautiful. So we're going to save the rest of this whipped cream. Put this to the side real quick. Wipe my hands here. And we're going to go ahead and dust these with powdered sugar. And that is a very traditional way. If you don't want to dust it with sugar, that's fine too. So we like to have a good layer of sugar on ours. So we have sugar in the cream. We've got sparkling sugar that's baked onto the shells that gives it a nice crisp crunch to it. And then we've got the powdered sugar on top. So there we go. That is our cream horns made from scratch. So while our cream horn shells are cooling, we're going to go ahead and make our cannoli shell dough. So in my bowl, I've got 2 cups of all-purpose flour. And to this, we're going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, tablespoon of sugar, and we're going to just mix it up with our fingers, make sure it's all incorporated together. And to this, we're going to add 6 tablespoons of cold butter that's been cut up in little cubes, little 1/2-inch cubes. I'm just going to go ahead and put that in there. Now, if you want to not get your fingers in the dough, but I like to because I like to feel the dough, you can certainly put it in your food processor and just pulse it a few times until it becomes crumbly. So we just want to smush it between our fingers so that we're flattening the butter between our fingers so it looks like this. You get little flats of butter. We're coating the flour with the butter, which is going to make for a nice crisp shell. And there's another secret to traditional cannoli shells that makes it crisp, and that's the wine. The wine, because of the alcohol content in it, makes the shells nice and holy and crispy. If you don't want to use wine, you can certainly use water with a little bit, maybe a 1/4 teaspoon of vanilla and a 1/2 teaspoon of vinegar, because the wine is an acid, and you know, in baking, everything is like chemistry. And so there's certain ingredients that do certain things, and the wine, obviously, because it is an acid, it lends the crispiness to the shell. So if you don't want to use wine, like I said, use a little. You can use milk. We've got a 1/2 cup of wine, so substitute a 1/2 cup of milk, a 1/2 cup of water, with just a drop of vanilla and a 1/2 teaspoon of vinegar. But something to an acid to add to the flour mixture so that you can get a crispy shell. You can also add a tablespoon of vodka. What we're going to do is we got our 1/2 cup of wine. We're going to add 1 egg yolk to it. And we're going to make a little well in the center, and we're going to pour that mixture in there. So that's the only liquid that we're going to be using, is that 1 egg yolk and the wine. Or like I said, if you're not using wine, whatever alternative that you're using. For this cannoli shell, if you're egg-free in your house, there's really no substitute for the egg. The egg adds a richness to the dough. The dough is still a little bit dry, so I'm going to add a couple more tablespoons of water to the dough, just to be sure that it comes together nicely. And we don't want to add any more than a couple if your flour is dry. especially in the winter time when you're storing your flour in your home and you've had the heat on, and flours, they lose their moisture, and then during the summer they retain moisture. So seasonally you might have to adjust your recipe a little bit. That's why I like to do this by hand, because you really can't tell if you've got too much liquid in your dough unless you're actually touching the dough, which is why and we're still dry, so this is a really dry flour today. So we've added a total of 4 tablespoons of liquid. But we want the dough to become cohesive because we're going to be rolling these out and then cutting them in a circle so we can put them around the forms. So we're going to stop here. I think that's going to be good. So we're going to turn this out onto a board. Get this out of the way here for you. And we're going to throw down some flour here so it doesn't stick. As you can see, it's come together pretty nicely. We're going to cut this in half and work with just one section at a time. So you'll be able to see the dough come together so it's a nice disc like this. Put this in the cooler or the freezer. I think I said in one of my other episodes that one of my cheat tricks is to wrap it in plastic and stick it in the freezer for a few minutes to let it get cold, and so that the gluten relaxes, because the flour has gluten in it, and when we agitate the flour with a liquid and the fat like the butter or an oil, the gluten releases and the dough can become tough. So we want to let the dough relax, is what we call it in the baking world, to relax a little bit so that the gluten doesn't resist. So when you're rolling the dough out, if you've ever made pie dough by hand or from scratch, it seems to push back against you and it snaps back. That's because the dough's been agitated, the gluten has been formed. It needs to rest for a few minutes so that it relaxes and you can get a nice roll out of it. So we're going to let this go ahead and relax for a couple of minutes, and while we're doing that, we're going to go ahead and check on our cream horn forms. So our cannoli shell dough has been chilled, like I said, for about 7 to 10 minutes in the freezer, wrapped in plastic. So we're going to put some flour down on our board. I'm going to flour a little bit on the top and bottom. And we're going to roll it out. Now, depending on how big you want your cannoli, these cannoli forms are on the larger size that they make. They do make them smaller, so you could use a smaller cutter. But we want the dough to be rolled fairly thin. Now, we don't want to roll back and forth like this. We want to turn it and come from the center and bring it out. And there's all sorts of techniques that people say to do this to get a crispy crust. And so you do go through all these, what seems to be like gyrations to make a good crust. And it's actually pretty simple. Just add an acid to the dough, which is the wine or vinegar or something, or vodka, and then not handle the dough too much. So we're just going to continue turning and rolling like this. And because the cannoli shells are fried, we can reuse the scraps only once. So whatever scraps are left over, we can re-roll one time. And I found that they fry up just as good as the first roll, which usually isn't the case. And as you can see, you can almost see my hand through the dough. And that's the thickness that we want the cannoli shells to be. So this is about a 4.5, 5-inch cutter, or this is a tart ring actually. If you don't have tart rings at home, use a glass, use a canning lid, whatever you've got around, or if you don't have any of those big enough that you want to make your cannoli, you can use your pizza cutter. So what I normally like to do when I have leftovers is I just put them into the next batch of dough and incorporate those so that they kind of get re-moistured with this new dough. And I'm going to lay some more flour down. And again, if the dough is the right consistency, you don't need a lot of flour, which is a good thing. So I do have my oil behind me heating up in a cast iron Dutch oven. You don't need any special frying equipment to do this. Put some oil in a pot and get it to about 350, 375. 400 is a little too hot. The shells will burn before they actually cook through. But these shells don't take long to cook, a couple of minutes, and then we're taking them out of the oil. So we don't want to cook them too long. Gonna need a little bit more flour here. So I know I have pretty fond memories of baking pies with my mother and grandmother and when I was coming up, and this is something that you can teach your kids to do. I don't think we'll have enough dough to do all these forms, but I did spray these forms like I did the cream horn shells with Baker's Joy. So we're going to put that aside and save that for a little bit here. We're going to go ahead and assemble these that we've got right now. So we've got a sprayed cannoli form, and we're just going to lay it in the middle of the dough circle, and we're going to stick it to the form, and then we're going to take a little bit of egg wash, and we're just going to brush that, and then I'm going to roll it over and then slightly press so that it seals the cannoli form, because sometimes I've made cannolis and I didn't get a good seal on it and it popped off and it popped open, and so you don't have a shell, you just have, looks like a kind of a half-closed tortilla shell, and we don't want that, although you can still put the cannoli filling on it and eat it like a tostada. That's what it looks like, but that's how we're going to do those. And so we'll just continue making these cannoli forms, and like the cream horn shells, it goes pretty fast. So once you get the hang of it, you can move really fast, and you can make quite a lot of these once you get the circles cut out and get them in the oil. But you know, this kind of baking and cooking for your family is becoming a lost art. You know, our lives are so busy now that we don't want to take the time to do this and maintain our culture and maintain the. See, now this one, there's too much of a space here, so I'm glad that I saw that. We're going to roll that just a little bit tighter around the form so that it doesn't come off. There we go. That looks better. And if you want to, you can flute the edges a little bit, like this. Although you don't have to, but if you want to make them a little bit fancier, you can flute them like that, so they fry like that. So now we're frying the cannoli shells, and I'm only frying 3 at a time, so the oil's at about 350 degrees. I did take the thermometer out so that I could have room for one more cannoli shell. Again, we don't want to crowd the frying, but I do move them around so that they don't get stuck on the bottom or brown too much on one side. So I like to move them around just a little bit in the oil. I don't fry much at my house. My husband loves fried chicken. He's from the South, and I think that's his favorite meal. In fact, I was an executive chef and a manager at a restaurant in North Carolina, and he was one of my customers. And he came in for my fried chicken and coconut cake. And 2 years later, we were married, but I made him wait for like 8 months before I went on a date with him. So he'd come to the restaurant and for my fried chicken and coconut cake. So that's about the only thing I do make for him every once in a while is fried chicken. And don't grab him by the metal tip, because that's when it's going to slip completely out of the grip of the tong, even though it's metal silicone tip. So safety first. But it's going to take probably a good 4 to 5 minutes to fry, just to make sure you want the interior of the shell to be completely cooked. See how nice and brown they're getting, but they're not quite done yet, so we're going to let them cook a little bit longer. Because the last thing you want is to bite into a cannoli shell and have the inside kind of half cooked. We don't want that. We want them nice and crisp when they cool, so that you get that shatter when you bite into them. That's what we're looking for. And what I normally do is I let the cannoli shells that have been cooked, I let them cool for about a minute or so, and then I want to take them off the form. So we do that with a dry towel, not a wet towel, because the heat will come through the wet towel faster than it will the dry and burn your hand. But we want to get those shells off the form as quickly as we can without getting burned. Okay, so all of our cannoli shells are fried, and as you can see, we had a couple kind of blow open a little bit. That's okay. So I've had some that completely come apart and we can still eat them. That's the chef's delight or the cook's delight. So we want to be sure that they're cool all the way inside, so you can, stick your finger in here and you can feel if there's still any heat coming out. And these are fairly cool. So we've got our ricotta mascarpone mixture in our piping bag with our cream cheese, or with our chocolate chips in there. And so we're going to just pipe one end and then the other end, and then it goes right into the chocolate chips. And we just keep doing that until they're all full. And you're going to get some crumbs coming off because these cannolis are nice and crisp and they're flaky, which is what we wanted when we make them from scratch. So we just shoot both ends full of the delicious cream filling. Now, if you have any chocolate chips that are left over once you've done dipping, don't put them back in the bag because it's got cream milk products on it. If you want to save it for your cannoli and have your special cannoli filling container in the fridge, if you make them on a regular basis, that's fine. But this is something that we can't put back into the bag and reuse once they're dipped them in the chocolate chips. I always say safety first. Nobody wants to get sick off a cannoli filling. So, and on these ones that have busted open, sometimes it's hard to get the filling inside, but this one looks like the inside still maintained. It didn't close up inside, so we can still dip and fill. And this one has a more narrow opening, and I don't know how much we're going to be able to get in there, but you know what, in something like this, just run it right across the top. And you have like a little cannoli taco, and then you just want to sprinkle. So, you know, even if you have a misshapen cannoli, this is, like I said, this is the cook's delight, and this can be your dessert. And so we're going to finish our cannoli with a dusting of powdered sugar. Again, this is very traditional, but I like to have a good shower. Again, it's like the cream horns. If you're going to eat something that's going to be crispy, like a croissant that crumbles in your mouth, you want to get powdered sugar and dough and everything all over you, so that's fine. So that is our cannolis today. So we finished with our cream horns and our Sicilian cannoli that has a slight orange taste to it. And I hope you enjoy these recipes as much as my family and our customers at Rocca's Bakery does. And this is Chef Deborah signing off. Until next time, we bake your day better.